My child, you don't have to wear a white lab coat to save someone. As long as you know how to observe and have a loving heart, that's enough. That was the advice that would decide one person's fate. A billionaire is on the brink of death at a luxury resort. The only person who can save him is someone he has just ordered to stay put. But there is a surprise. She will save his life at all costs, even if he never realizes it. The Montaña Verde Resort, where the price of one night is equal to Nina's entire year's salary, is a world of luxury and tranquility. Marble floors glisten under crystal chandeliers, and every staff member is like an invisible ghost, serving guests who are treated like gods. Nina, a 27-year-old black woman with straight black hair, glides through those hallways with her cleaning cart, a part of the scenery that no one truly notices. She lives in her own shyness, doing a cleaning job for people who earn more in 1 hour than she does in a year of hard work. On her uniform chest, a faded silver pin that says nursing school dropout is like a scar, a painful reminder of a failure she can't seem to remove. Room 1247 belonged to Will Smith, a tech mogul whose medical software empire had revolutionized hospitals worldwide. He was here to escape lawsuits, public scrutiny, and a world that had suddenly begun to doubt his judgment. To him, Nina was nothing more than a piece of furniture, useful, silent, and easily forgotten. The power dynamic was clear. He gave orders. She followed. He spoke. She listened. He was important, and she was not. Unbeknownst to Will, Nina carried something more valuable than all his software algorithms, a deep and tragic connection to medicine. Every morning, as she touched the textbook on her cleaning cart, she heard her mother's voice echo, "My love, you don't need a white coat to save a life. You just need eyes that see and a heart that cares." Her mother, a devoted nurse, had passed away due to a misdiagnosis. The doctors had been too complacent, trusting their degrees more than the heartfelt pleas of her family. After the funeral, Nina dropped out of school, burying her dream of becoming a nurse. She believed she would never be smart enough, competent enough, or important enough to be noticed in a world of degrees and white lab coats. Now, she quietly cleaned rooms for people who barely acknowledged her existence, with a sealed trove of medical knowledge and the loving encouragement of a mother who had believed in her more than anyone else. That morning, the quiet of room 1247 was shattered by a chilling discovery. As Nina silently gathered towels, her eyes unintentionally grazed the calf of the sleeping Will Smith. She froze, a cold shiver running down her spine. There was a red rash, with a distinct circular point in the center, looking exactly like the pictures of Lyme disease in her mother's medical textbook. A bullseye rash, an unmistakable sign. Based on its shape and color, Will Smith probably had only a few weeks before the bacteria spread to his heart and brain. Nina's hands trembled as she put down her cleaning supplies. She knew exactly what she had seen, and she also understood what it meant. But how could a cleaner like her voice a medical opinion in a world that only trusted degrees and titles? Suddenly, her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Sometimes, my love, doing the right thing is more important than being heard." The girl everyone ignored now held the key to saving a life, and time was running out. 3 silent days passed. Nina, with her straight hair swaying gently with each step, still quietly cleaned Will's room every morning. She watched helplessly as subtle changes slowly transformed the man she had tried to warn. His confident stride was now cautious, his sharp eyes were dulled by fatigue, and the hands that once commanded meetings now trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. It wasn't just the physical changes that caught Nina's trained eye. Will's morning routine, once as precise as a clock, was now erratic. He sat for hours in front of his laptop without typing, staring at the screen with surprising confusion. She found forgotten coffee cups scattered around the room, as if he had lost his bearings. The shy girl who had learned to be invisible now memorized every small detail. The way he rubbed his temples during calls, how he paused mid-sentence to search for words that once flowed easily, and the inspirational business magazines, which lay unread as he drifted into fitful daytime naps. Dr. Carlos Viana arrived on Thursday. his black Mercedes cutting through the mountain mist like a symbol of expensive authority. He was Will's personal physician and a longtime family friend who had been visiting the Garcia family for over a decade. Tall, with salt and pepper hair, and a demeanor that made lesser men step aside, he entered the resort with the confidence of a man whose opinion had never been questioned by anyone of consequence. Nina was in the hallway polishing brass fixtures when she first saw him walk by. His Italian leather shoes tapped on the marble with a rhythm of absolute certainty. She recognized this type of man instantly, the kind of doctor who treated symptoms on paper instead of flesh and blood people, who trusted labs more than intuition. The resort's general manager, Mr. Silva, personally escorted Dr. Viana to Will's room, his usual professional courtesy now tinged with obvious deference. Nina, who had worked at Montaña Verde long enough to recognize subtle signs, understood that a rearrangement of the hierarchy was underway. When someone arrives who is treated with more respect than the guests themselves, everyone's demeanor changes. Nina was quietly organizing cleaning supplies in a closet when she overheard their conversation from the adjacent living room. The door was ajar, and Dr. Viana's authoritative voice carried through clearly. She wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but something in his dismissive tone made her freeze. Her heart began to pound with a familiar dread. "It's just stress, Will." "Doctor." Viana's voice was filled with the kind of certainty that powerful men use to dismiss uncomfortable truths. A year-long lawsuit would exhaust anyone. "The mountain air, the humidity. Your body is just adjusting. A few good nights of sleep, maybe some light exercise. But the joint pain, Carlos, and I keep losing my train of thought mid-sentence," Will wondered. "It's all psychosomatic." Dr. Viana replied, his voice reassuring. "The mind is a powerful thing. Your body is just manifesting the stress from the legal issues. I've seen it countless times in high-pressure executives. A week of proper rest will solve it all." Among the hanging clothes, Nina stood motionless. She gripped her cleaning supplies so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had heard these exact same words 5 years ago, when her mother's colleagues had dismissed her concerns as professional stress. "What about blood tests?" Will asked, and Nina held her breath. "Unnecessary," Dr. Viana stated definitively. "I can diagnose stress without running a battery of expensive tests. Trust me, Will. I've been practicing medicine longer than that cleaning girl has been alive." The unintentional cruelty of that statement was a punch to Nina's gut. "Doctor." Viana didn't even know she existed, yet he had casually dismissed her from a conversation about the very symptoms she had recognized days ago. Dưới đây là bản dịch của đoạn văn bản đã cung cấp, được diễn đạt bằng tiếng Anh một cách tự nhiên và phù hợp với người bản địa. That evening, after her shift had ended, Nina found Will in the resort's library. He was slumped in a leather armchair, a book resting loosely in his lap. The confident CEO was gone, replaced by a frail man battling an unnamed illness and an unseen enemy. The library, a quiet space she usually retreated to for a break from work-related stress, a place rarely visited by guests after dinner, was now where she found him. Witnessing Will's complete deterioration, her nurturing instincts took over, for the first time overriding her self-preservation instinct since their first encounter. He looked up as she entered, and for the first time, he didn't look through her, or past her, but straight at her. The sudden shift stunned Nina so much she almost dropped her cleaning supplies. "You're Nina, right?" His voice was hoarse, a weariness that sleep couldn't erase. "Nina Dobrev," she replied, surprised that he knew her name, and even more surprised that he used it. For the past 3 years, guests had only ever called her the girl, "Hey you," or simply gestured. "I keep thinking about what you said about the tick." Will shifted in his chair, wincing at a movement that shouldn't have been painful. "You recognized it." Nina's throat went dry. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, a place where past and present intertwined. "My mother was a nurse," the shy girl said softly. "She taught me to pay attention to the unusual things. And where is she now?" The question hung in the air. Nina could have evaded it, but the genuine curiosity in Will's eyes made her answer truthfully. "She passed away 5 years ago. They misdiagnosed her with pneumonia, but it was actually a rare autoimmune condition. By the time they figured it out, her organs had started to fail. Nina's voice caught as she spoke these words to a stranger. Her doctor said the symptoms were just nurses' hypochondria, that medical professionals always think they're sicker than they are. Will leaned forward, his business instincts recognizing something of value in her quiet honesty. Is that why you dropped out of nursing school? The question hit her like a physical blow. She was so used to being ignored that having someone truly see her was both terrifying and strangely motivating. I couldn't save her, she whispered. So what was the point of trying to save anyone else? But you still tried to save me. Nina met his gaze for a moment before looking away. Some habits are hard to break. Will studied her face with an intensity that made her want to disappear back into her comfortable invisibility. Your mother sounds like an extraordinary woman, Nina replied, her voice almost inaudible. She was everything I'm not. She was confident, respected, and trusted. She could walk into any room, and people listened. Maybe you're more like her than you think. The words hung between them, as fragile as spun glass. Nina felt something shifting inside her chest. Not healing yet, but the possibility of it. The hope that maybe her voice did matter. That maybe her mother's lessons hadn't died with her. The next morning, the changes were no longer deniable. Will's left hand began to tremble slightly. He tried to hide it in his pocket. His words would occasionally slur at the end of a sentence, a subtle mispronunciation that anyone not paying attention would have missed. But Nina always paid attention. She had learned from her mother that the devil is in the details. That the line between life and death is often separated by the most seemingly insignificant things. During her morning cleaning, Nina, with her straight hair framing her face, noticed new details painting a troubling picture. Will's handwriting, once sharp and decisive, was now shaky and uncertain. She saw pages of notes with sentences left unfinished mid-thought. His laptop displayed multiple browser tabs open to medical websites, searching for joint pain, memory problems, unexplained fatigue. He was trying to self-diagnose. Nina realized that the man who had dismissed her concerns was now desperately searching for the answers his expensive doctor refused to give. That afternoon, Dr. Viana returned, his confidence unshaken by the symptoms that should have been alarming to any competent physician. Nina lingered in the hallway outside Will's room, strategically placing her cleaning cart so she could overhear their conversation without appearing to eavesdrop. The tremor is stress-related, Dr. Viana declared with the authority of a man who had never been wrong. It's likely a mild anxiety disorder stemming from your legal issues. I can prescribe something for that. Carlos, I feel like my brain is covered in cotton, Will said. Yesterday I forgot my own phone number. This isn't stress. Will, you are a brilliant man, but you are not a doctor. Let's leave the diagnosing to those of us who actually went to medical school. These symptoms are a classic manifestation of executive burnout. The casual cruelty of Dr. Viana's last words sent a chill down Nina's spine. She had heard similar sentiments her whole life, the sharp, cutting phrases that people with degrees used against those without them. But sometimes, a degree can blind you to the truth, and the person without one is the only one who can save a life. I want a blood test, Will said, his voice more resolute than ever. If it gives you peace of mind, fine, but I can guarantee we'll find nothing but elevated stress hormones and perhaps a few vitamin deficiencies from your erratic eating habits. Nina heard the disdain in Dr. Viana's voice. It was the same disdain her mother had faced when trying to advocate for her own health. The medical system that was supposed to heal had instead created a hierarchy where being right was less important than having a degree. That evening, after her shift, Nina sat in her small apartment above the staff quarters. The room was sparse, furnished with the bare essentials, but the bookshelf told a different story. Medical textbooks, nursing journals, volumes of clinical studies that most people would find impenetrable. She had been cross-referencing symptoms, comparing timelines, building a case that no one would ever allow her to present. Every piece of evidence pointed to the same conclusion. Will Smith was dying of a preventable illness. If only someone would listen to a person who had no right to speak. Her mother's medical bag, carefully preserved for 5 years, sat on the table. Nina opened it with reverent hands, finding the stethoscope and blood pressure cuff tools that had once been magic in her mother's hands. There was a thermometer, a flashlight, and other basic supplies, all representing what Nina had given up. But that evening, they represented possibility. Sometimes, the truth comes from the most unexpected places. But what happens when pride is stronger than evidence? The anonymous note appeared on Will's bedside table like a materialized whisper. Please test for Lyme disease. The early signs are treatable. Stage 2 can affect the heart and nervous system. Stage 3 can be permanent. A concerned person. Will read it 3 times. His hand trembled, not from the illness, but from an almost overwhelming dread. The handwriting was careful, feminine. The words were chosen with the precision of someone with medical knowledge. Whoever wrote it knew exactly what they were talking about. But Dr. Viana dismissed it with a laugh that was more derisive than amused. Anonymous medical advice, Will, please. Anyone can look up symptoms on the internet. This is exactly the kind of paranoid thinking that stress creates. You're letting your imagination run away with you. What if they're right? They're not. And even if there were a grain of truth to it, Lyme disease is a country myth, overdiagnosed by rural doctors. The chances of you contracting it at a resort of this caliber are essentially 0. But 0 was no longer enough for Will. The tremor in his left hand had spread to his arm. The fog in his brain had thickened, making even simple decisions difficult. Deep in his mind, the calm voice of a cleaning girl still echoed. Might be from a tick. Friday morning brought the crisis that changed everything. Nina found him collapsed in the bathroom, conscious but with the left side of his face drooping. The confident CEO who had dismissed her 3 days earlier could no longer speak clearly. His words were slurred from a partial paralysis that had crept across his face like a slow storm. Help, he managed to slur out a single word. Nina didn't hesitate. She dialed 911, her voice steady and clear as she gave the symptoms and timeline to the dispatcher. After that, she stayed with him, her small hand gripping his larger one. Her presence was the only anchor in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. It's going to be okay, she told him, her own heart pounding. This is treatable. We caught it in time. Medical personnel arrived with the efficiency of experience, but it was the ER doctor who delivered the confirmation that split Will's world into before and after. Dr. Sarah Mendez, young and with keen eyes, saw the now undeniable bullseye rash and ordered an immediate blood test. Lyme disease, she announced an hour later. Her voice was clinical yet gentle. Stage 2, already affecting the facial nerves. But you are lucky. Had it progressed to stage 3, we would have been talking about permanent neurological damage. Will lay on the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling as the antibiotics began their work. Lucky. He was lucky because someone had been paying attention. A person whose concerns he had dismissed without a second thought. The facial paralysis should subside within a few weeks, Dr. Mendez continued. But I have to ask, how did you know to get tested? Most people don't recognize the early symptoms. Will turned his head toward the window, where the evening light was painting the mountains gold. Someone tried to tell me. Someone I didn't listen to. Dr. Viana appeared in the doorway, his face pale. The blood tests had told the truth, and his reputation was suddenly as fragile as Will's health had been hours earlier. Will's voice was low but final. Get out. Just get out. After Dr. Viana shuffled away, Will asked the nurse to call the resort. He needed to talk to Nina, the woman he had been too arrogant to listen to. But Nina didn't pick up. When the resort manager finally found her, she was sitting in the employee parking lot, a crumpled resignation letter in her hand. I can't do this anymore, she told her supervisor, the tears of 5 years finally accumulating. I tried to help someone, and when they finally saw that I was right, I just felt empty, like it was too little, too late. She was getting into her old Honda when Will appeared beside the car, still in his hospital clothes and moving carefully, almost on his own. The left side of his face still had a slight droop, but his eyes were clearer than they had been in months. "Don't go," he said simply. Nina rolled down her window, wiping away tears she hadn't known were falling. "Are you okay? That's what's important." "No, what's important is that you saved my life, and I treated you like you were invisible." Will knelt beside her car, bringing himself to her eye level. "I was wrong about everything. About you. About what's important. About who deserves to be heard." For the first time since her mother's death, Nina felt something stir in her chest. It wasn't complete healing yet, but the possibility of it, the hope that her voice mattered, and that her mother's lessons were still alive. The moment was powerful in its raw honesty. Could two broken people find a path to healing together, when arrogance had nearly cost one of them everything? Will realize that recovery wasn't a straight line, but a winding journey that required humility and help. The antibiotics were ridding his body of the bacteria. But the true healing was happening in silent moments, in conversations that completely changed his perception of what it meant to be intelligent. Nina didn't quit. She stayed, not as a cleaner, but as something more undefinable. A friend, or simply a person who had earned the right to be heard. Each evening, they met in the resort library. Nina, with her long straight hair, shared her mother's medical journals. Will shared his vision for making medical technology more accessible to the people who truly needed it. "Your mother was brilliant," Will said one night, looking up from a nursing journal filled with careful notes in the margins. The insights she had about patient observation, the importance of paying attention to subtle changes, it's exactly what we're missing in modern medicine. Nina ran her finger over her mother's handwriting, remembering late nights she spent as a study partner, learning to see patterns where others only saw symptoms. She always said that technology should amplify human judgment, not replace it. What if it could do both? Will leaned forward, the entrepreneur in him recognizing an opportunity. What if we created something that helped doctors listen better? Something that gave weight to the observations of people like you? An idea gradually formed, like a sunrise over the mountains. Will's software company had the technical expertise. Nina had the clinical acuity from years of observation and care. Together, they began to design something unprecedented, a diagnostic tool that democratized medical observation, giving a voice to the voiceless. But first, there was an apology to be made. The confrontation with Dr. Vienna took place in Will's lawyer's office, a sterile room where reputations went to die. The older doctor sat across from them, his salt and pepper hair perfectly coiffed, but his confidence was finally shattered. "You almost killed me," Will said bluntly. "Your arrogance, your refusal to consider that someone without your degree might know something you didn't. It nearly cost me my life." Dr. Vienna shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Will, you have to understand. You have to understand that this woman," Will gestured toward Nina, who was sitting quietly beside him, "saw what you missed. She knew what you didn't. And you dismissed her because she cleaned rooms instead of examining them." The subsequent lawsuit made headlines not for the monetary damages, but for a landmark precedent. For the first time, a patient had successfully sued a doctor not for misdiagnosis, but for diagnostic arrogance, for refusing to listen to non-medical observations that proved to be correct. The settlement funded something more important than justice: change. 6 months later, Will stood on a stage at the annual Medical Technology Conference. His face was fully healed, but it bore the marks of a deeper, non-physical recovery. Beside him was Nina, a black woman with long, straight black hair, wearing a simple black dress and radiating the quiet confidence of someone who had finally been heard. "Ladies and gentlemen," Will began. His voice echoed through the packed auditorium. "I want to tell you about the day a cleaner saved my life." His story was a lesson in humility. Will left no detail out, describing his arrogance, his dismissal of Nina's concerns, and the near-fatal cost of his complacency. The audience of doctors, nurses, and healthcare executives listened in absolute silence as he dismantled everything they thought they knew about expertise and authority. We created a medical system that valued credentials over observation, degrees over intuition, and titles over truth, Will continued. And in doing so, we silenced the most important voices in healthcare. The people who spend the most time with patients, who notice the subtle changes, who care enough to pay attention. He turned to Nina, who, with the grace of a person who had found her voice, stepped forward. This is Nina Dobrev. She's not a doctor, but she saw what doctors missed. She's not a nurse, but she understands what nurses know. She's the person we should have been listening to all along. Nina's speech was short but profound. Her words carried the weight of every dismissed observation, every ignored concern, every life that could have been saved if someone had just listened. It was inspiring in its simplicity and power. I didn't need a white coat to care about people, she said, her voice clear and firm. I didn't need a medical degree to notice when something was wrong. What I needed, what we all need, is a healthcare system that recognizes wisdom from wherever it comes. The standing ovation lasted 7 minutes. Could two people who found each other in their darkest moments change an entire system? 3 years later, the Montagne Verde Institute for Collaborative Health rose on a sprawling campus in the Minas Gerais mountains, not far from the resort where it all began. The building's design reflected its mission: glass walls instead of closed doors, circular seating instead of hierarchical arrangements, spaces that encouraged conversation between people who would never have talked in traditional medical settings. Nina walked the halls with the calm stride of a person who had learned to trust her own power. Her long, straight black hair framed her face, and the white coat she wore had no name badge or list of degrees. There was only a simple pin that read Director of Observation, a title Will had created specifically for her role in training healthcare professionals to recognize and value non-clinical observations. It had caused some raised eyebrows in the medical community, but the measurable improvements in early diagnosis rates spoke louder than any degree. The Institute's diagnostic app, powered by Nina's insights and Will's technology, had already prevented dozens of cases like Will's. Cleaners, teachers, family members, anyone who spent significant time with others could enter observations that the system would analyze for patterns that might indicate serious illnesses. Medical professionals still made the final diagnosis, but now they had access to information they had never considered before. Nina, Will appeared at her office door, holding a familiar-looking envelope. The Ministry of Health wants to expand the National Lyme Surveillance Program. They're using our model as the foundation. She looked up from her desk, where patient observation reports were spread out like pieces of a puzzle that only she could solve. 8 years ago, she had dropped out of nursing school believing she couldn't save anyone. Now, she was saving people she would never meet, lives that hung in the balance between observation and action. My mother would be proud, Nina said softly. She'd be impressed, Will corrected. You built something she couldn't have imagined. Through the window, they could see the day's first group arriving for the Institute's community education program. Salespeople, hotel staff, teachers, parents, people who had never considered themselves part of the healthcare system but were learning how to recognize the signs that doctors might miss. Will stood with Nina at the window, watching as a young woman led a group of summer camp counselors through how to identify the symptoms of tick-borne illnesses. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't spoken up that day? Nina considered the question, recalling the shy, scared girl who had trembled while trying to warn a man who wouldn't listen. I think about all the times I didn't speak up, she said finally. All the observations I kept to myself because I thought they didn't matter. And now? Now I know that every voice matters, every observation, every person who cares enough to pay attention. She turned from the window to face him, and Will saw in her eyes the woman who had emerged from the shadow of tragedy. We're not just changing how medicine works, Will. We're changing who practices it. The afternoon brought their weekly case review, where medical experts and community observers analyzed diagnostic challenges together. Nina watched as an ER nurse reported a janitor's observations on a patient's behavioral patterns, while a renowned cardiologist asked a patient's daughter about subtle changes she had noticed at home. The transformation was astounding. This was the revolution they had started. Not dramatic or loud, but profound and lasting. A healthcare system that listened as carefully as it looked, that valued caring as much as it did knowledge. One that understood that sometimes the person with no medical training at all could be the one who saves a life. As the sun set over the mountains, Nina and Will walked the same forest trails where ticks had once threatened and observation had triumphed. "Thank you," he said softly. The words had become a ritual between them. "For what?" Nina asked, even though she knew the answer. "For seeing me when I couldn't see you," Will replied. "For saving my life when I couldn't save my pride. For showing me that the most important thing about intelligence isn't what you know, but caring enough to recognize what you don't." They stopped at a clearing where the Institute was building its next expansion, a training center for healthcare professionals who wanted to learn the art of listening to voices they had never heard before. The foundation had been laid, but the true structure would be built from changed minds and open hearts. Nina smiled, feeling her mother's presence in the evening breeze. "Some lessons are worth learning the hard way." "Yeah," Will agreed.